We were camping for 4 days in an area of the Red Feather Lakes in northern Colorado. Deep in the woods, we were 20 miles down a dirt road without anyone else in sight. We arrived during the day and didn't notice anything unusual. We had enough supplies for about 6 days for our party. This included my wife and I, my brother-in-law, my 3 nephews, aged 5, 6, and 8, and our dogs. Day 1 was amazing. We spent the day hiking, fishing, stargazing, and making s'mores. The dogs loved roaming around. The next day was equally wonderful, filled with activities like yard games such as cornhole and other board games with the boys. However, around 6 p.m., the mood changed. The dogs suddenly seemed very on edge, patrolling the edge of our camp with their hackles raised, occasionally growling at the woods. We didn't think much of it at first. We hiked miles into the forest, and everything around us was just more forest for miles in every direction. There was a hill we could climb about 700 feet or higher that allowed us to get above the tree line for stargazing. From there, we could see in every direction, with no other lights or campfires in sight. We figured the dogs were just detecting wildlife, and maybe a curious black bear, or even a mountain lion. They are big dogs, and we were armed. We didn't let the kids wander too far from our sight, but again, it didn't seem like an issue. That night, us adults stayed up around the campfire until about 1 a.m. I kept getting the feeling that something was watching us. I was more on edge than usual, despite being an avid camper with plenty of experiences and run-ins with bears and other wildlife. It just felt different. When we finally went to bed, I don't think I slept more than half an hour at a time. I swear, I kept hearing the occasional crack of branches off in the woods. The next day, we didn't notice anything odd about the camp, although my brother suspected something had happened to our water. We had 5 or 6 of those 5-gallon jugs with the pull-out spigots. 2 were in my truck, 1 in our tent, 1 in his car, and the remaining 2 appeared drained, although it might have been the boys or a leak. We decided we might pack it in after lunch on day 3. We didn't want to end our trip early, but things just felt strange. The boys were sad, and we were back and forth on whether or not we were being paranoid. But the dogs seemed so on guard and went crazy sniffing around during our hike that day. After lunch, we started packing up our gear, packing up 2 tents, games, food, and other things. It took a while, especially with 3 little boys running around, so we weren't in a rush. By the time we were all loaded up, we decided to heat up a quick dinner. The boys had one last request. They wanted to go snipe hunting. We still had about an hour of daylight left, so we agreed. We went off into the forest and did the classic snipe hunt routine. My brother-in-law led us in a wide circle that would end back at camp. My wife stayed in the middle with the boys, and I trailed off to the rear. I'd pick up small rocks and sticks. When the boys were looking away, I'd toss them to make them jump. The other adult would go, "Oh my gosh, I think the snipe went this way." It was good fun. As the sun was setting, not yet dark, but getting close, we were nearing camp. A rock the size of 2 fists came flying in, barely missing one of my nephews. The adults looked back at me like I was crazy, and I told them it wasn't me. Another rock came in and hit me square in the back. We didn't even ask questions. I just said time to go. Each adult grabbed a kid, and we booked it back to our cars. As we reached the cars, the woods behind us were moving. Bushes shook, and the tree branches cracked and popped. We loaded up quickly, not caring if we left anything behind. We had about 20 miles of dirt road back to concrete. About a quarter mile into our drive, the road became littered with bones and animal carcasses, beheaded deer and raccoon bodies, some fresh, others just bones. We drove left and right, trying to avoid hitting any of them. It felt like nearly a mile of this. Finally, we made it through, and it was clear driving for a couple of miles. We reached a clearing and saw a green bus pulled off for another campsite. For some reason, I decided to stop and see if there was anyone there to warn them of what just happened. My brother kept driving down the road with my nephews. My wife stayed in the car, and I approached the green bus. As I got close, I saw it was super run down, flat tires, newspapers over the windows, peeling paint. There was a big fire pit, about 20 by 20 feet, and pretty deep. It was filled with an immense pile of bones. I saw moose antlers, femurs of all sizes, rib cages, around 40 animals worth of bones. Glancing around, I noticed little symbols on the bus, and tied up in the trees with string were a bunch of dead animals. I booked it back to the truck and said nope to my wife. We hauled it out of there down the road to catch up with my brother. The whole stop lasted maybe a minute. I was camping with a friend in an area of British Columbia known for its grizzly bears, black bears, and cougars. One evening, while sitting at the campfire after sunset, as it was just starting to get dark, we heard a sort of grunting and growling noise coming from the bushes not too far from our site. We ignored the first one or two sounds, but after the noise kept occurring every couple of minutes, it had our attention. We decided to look around to see if we could identify what was making the noise and hopefully scare it off. The noise continued every few minutes and eventually became louder. We assumed the source was getting closer to us, and the adrenaline was pumping. It's worth mentioning that all we had on us was a knife each, as we forgot to bring any bear spray and didn't have any guns with us on the trip. Next thing we knew, we heard a sound from behind us, which I can only describe as an entire tree being ripped out of the ground, split in two, and thrown to the ground again. It was a huge crashing noise, followed by dead silence. We sprinted back to the car and climbed inside, peering out into the darkness, trying to spot any signs of movement, but we couldn't see or hear anything. We never caught a glimpse of whatever made the noise, and the next morning, we searched extensively but couldn't find any signs of recently broken branches or fallen trees. We did find one cougar track a few hundred meters away on a sandy creek bed, but I'm not sure if that was related since the creek was in a different area than where the noise had come from. I still have no idea if it was a bear, a cougar, a Sasquatch, or something else. Needless to say, I didn't sleep at all that night. An ex-girlfriend and I were late getting to Tate's Hell State Forest in Carabel, Florida, back in May 2021. It was around 11 p.m., dark out, and we had been driving down an unimproved road for about 30 minutes. We then followed the GPS down a very narrow trail. I was driving a mid-sized truck, and the branches on either side of the truck were constantly scraping against it. We were driving slowly due to the ruts and puddles. That was when we saw something emerge from the left-hand side of the trail. It crossed the trail, stopped, looked at us in the truck, and then disappeared into the woods to the right-hand side. This all happened in a total of maybe 4 to 5 seconds, and it was on 2 legs. It seemed so out of place because of the location. We were 40 minutes outside of civilization and finished roads. The conditions, the time, and the speed and effortlessness which it moved. I can't even describe the marsh-like conditions we were driving through, all for this bipedal thing to traverse it with such ease. Its arms swung as it walked, its eyes reflected the headlights, and its body stood powerfully tall. The details of its skin or fur are a bit harder to describe due to the sprinkling rain as well as the 15-foot distance away. The most significant part of the story is that we were on the wrong trail. We got stuck just a few yards from where we saw this thing. As I fearfully got out to dig my tires out, nothing happened to us. I was exposed, out of my element, wet, knee-deep in mud, and alone outside the truck, as I didn't want my ex to get out. I struggled for 30 minutes and could have easily been harmed or approached. However, nothing happened. A tow truck rescued us at 2 a.m., and we gladly booked a hotel room for the night as we were extremely freaked out.